everyone. This is Pam Reese with Adventures in Aging, and I'm here with my friend
Gary Vandenberg. Pam, it's great to be back again today. And again, we want to start the show by thanking our new sponsor, Stridelight. And Stridelight provides quality diabetic shoes, custom inserts, foot orthotics, and other lower extremity products. Ask your podiatrist or doctor about them. Stridelight.
They're a perfect company, and I enjoyed having Tyler on with us in our last episode.
Oh, yeah. So what are we going to talk about today?
So, Gary, you and I have been in senior healthcare for a million years.
My whole life, it feels like.
Me as well. And probably combined, in all seriousness, it's probably been 60 years.
At least. I've been in it 40 years. So if you add in your 20-plus years.
Right.
And it's changed dramatically, hasn't it, over the years?
So back in the day, you had your old nursing homes, convalescent care.
Oh, yeah. They're the old folks' home. There's county homes and old folks' homes. And I know the first one I worked at, we had a little nursing home kind of deal, and everybody in town worked there.
Right.
And then they also had some buildings that were like assisted living, little assisted living houses type of thing. And now you've got these $1 million resorts.
You do.
And the industry has changed dramatically. And so it's interesting is to talk about what's happened in the past and what's happened into the future.
No, exactly. And so because of that, we are very excited to have a guest with us today. And his name is Jason Reese. And quite frankly, he's my husband, and I'm very proud of him. And just to give a little background of Jason, he served in our armed forces as an Army Ranger.
Right.
After his, I guess you call it a tour of duty.
Right.
He went into senior health care, starting as in nutritional services, had a dietetics degree, moved from there into utilization, and then director of operations, COO, CEO, president, owner of a senior health care company.
Right. One of my former bosses, a great boss, too.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And Jason brings 25 years of experience of the evolution of nursing homes, senior care, senior health. And we thought it would be so interesting to hear your perspective on how it began and where we are today. So, Jason, I'll let you, how'd this all happen?
Yeah, where did it all begin? Back in the 60s, did it have something to do with like the Medicare, Medicaid? Those programs came in the 60s, didn't they?
Sure. Well, first, thank you both for the invitation. I think the world of you. I'm so proud of what you guys are trying to do here with your show. And
thank you.
It's an honor to be a guest on it. So hopefully I'm able to add some insight into it, if not some humor. So, it's been around, obviously, for a long time, but more from an organized standpoint since really the Medicare program was developed in 1965. And that's really when the explosion happened. Prior to that, as you mentioned, there were community kind of facilities, convalescent homes. When I was 5 years old, there was one across the street from my house in upstate New York.
Right. Oh, wow.
Yep. Scared me to death to look at it.
No, they were scary places.
Yeah, it was a bad deal. So, it went from 1965 up until today and through a number of iterations along the way as far as how they were funded and reimbursed, but definitely the existing model that we operate under today even was originally created and implemented in 1965.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? With I know when I got involved, I remember having a discussion with a nursing home owner, and they said, I could make a lot of money, but I don't want to be part of the Medicare, program, the Medicaid program, because it comes with regulations. It would limit that person's ability to continue to thrive. But the majority of people in nursing homes, aren't they under some type of a program?
They are. So the average statistic, and again, it gets a little dangerous sometimes when you're talking averages because there are outliers, but almost 80% of the average long-term care facility is funded through the federal or state government. Mm-hmm. So only about 20% is through either private insurance or private pay directly from.
So they're the number one payer.
By far.
By customer. And with that comes all the regulations that deal with, how to do everything under the sun. I forget how many deficiencies, Pam, you know how many.
Oh, yeah. In fact, the nursing home industry is regulated only second to nuclear power.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
I have a great story. This is where we get off track, Jason, a little bit. But it was a facility down by St. Clairsville, Ohio, and they had actually gotten a deficiency years ago. And the problem they had was it had something, they didn't have a flood plan in case there was a flood, how they would deal with flood waters.
Yeah.
And they ended up writing one back, and they got in Reader's Digest because they said when they were up on a mountaintop, right? And so they said, well, when water gets to be 300 feet, we start the ark. When it gets 400 feet, we start gathering the animals. And it went that direction because this survey was so ridiculous. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
The flood, the whole United States would be underwater by the time it got to this place.
No, exactly. The regulations is very, very daunting for the nursing home industry. But it wasn't always that way. In the beginning, there really weren't any.
No, but I think anytime that you see something that is highly regulated, it explains itself that it was probably ill-conceived.
That's a good point.
And I think that is true specifically in the area of nursing homes or long-term care. The regulations came gradually.
Okay.
And they needed to, right? We've all seen many, many bad examples over the years and heard many bad stories that were a result of bad things happening. And I don't think that it was necessarily because bad people were there and were trying to do bad things. I think that the system from its genesis created bad behavior as an outcome of how you had to act almost. And then so along the way, as a reaction, the government is constantly trying to catch up to put their finger in the dike, if you will.
Sure.
To make a correction along the way. And it's always a reaction, and it's always very slow. And then it's usually very inhibiting for self-improvement to naturally happen in the market.
It's over the years. I remember being with different companies, and it'd be like this omnibus reconciliation thing. And I always sat there going, well, this is like the end of the world part 5 for me. You know what I mean? And it always came out that way. And you were sharing me a little bit that it kind of changed around the year 2000, wasn't it? The late 1990s, that something really impactful came into the reimbursement world at that point.
So in 1998, as you were mentioning, with the omnibus bill, there was a new introduction of a payment system that changed dramatically from the way things had historically been done. Before, it was what was called a cost-based system. And basically, you were reimbursed for what you spent. And anybody can imagine the idea of wanting something done and having a repairman come over to the house and saying, when I'm finished, I'll let you know time and materials, right?
Right.
Not too much. Maybe we have to sign up for that occasionally, but that's not the idea. We'd like a price up front. And so, unfortunately, in the past, under cost-based, and this existed initially in hospitals as well, it incentivized people to overspend.
Right.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so,
because it was dollar for dollar, correct?
Yeah. Along the way, there was a lot of, they try to put bumper rails up to give guidelines about how things need to work. But, it got ludicrous, right? To the point of where clearly things were being spent that didn't need to be spent and weren't directly helping patients, but were incentivizing people to make up maybe for deficits that they were experiencing other places. So it's kind of like this reactionary behavior. And so that ended in 1998 with PPS, where basically it went to a price-based system. So if I can give you an example, maybe before, and under the old system, it was kind of like a cafeteria. You would walk into it, you would pick your items, and you would go to the cash register and you would pay for them, right? Under the new system, it was more of what I would call the buffet style, where you basically became paid for the actual head or the customer that showed up. So $14.99, you get all these services, right? You get whatever's on the buffet, and so that's been in place really since 1998, and quickly in 2000, just in 2 years from its implementation, it was disastrous. and it resulted in 90% of all publicly traded companies that were involved in long-term care going bankrupt.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my!
I didn't realize that. So.
Yeah, it was very devastating, and I was part of a public company at that time, starting out kind of early in my executive career.
Yeah.
And so a lot of changes had to kind of quickly be implemented to kind of Band-Aid it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the stimulus checks, where we just went
Right.
through that with COVID.
Yes.
Those kinds of behaviors happened back in the day, right? To just because at the end of the day you have thousands of patients with bankrupt companies. What are we going to do?
Oh my!
Well, we've got to cover the bridge here. So they made some accommodations for it, and so that's kind of the evolution that's happened.
So over the years, as those regulations change, it's becoming more difficult for people to be in this business, I guess, the senior living business. And it's actually expanded because now, like I said a little bit, you've got assisted livings have boomed. Years ago, I think assisted livings were probably, an oddity. Now they're on every corner. And I don't even know what percentage of the whole business is assisted living.
Right,
Do you have a sense
right.
of how big of a business assisted living has become here?
No, I think the assisted living model is a great example of just the creative nature of the market, right? And it's always telling you something. And it's telling us that what was in place wasn't adequately meeting the needs of the consumer, right? So
Right.
the long-term care model that existed under nursing homes wasn't desirable. And I can't think even today, even though we've seen improvements and we've seen new facilities come online, besides you, Gary, and I've listened to some of these other podcasts that you guys have done, you're the only one I know that actually wants to end up in a nursing home.
Right.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yes, I brought that up to my kids the other day. Again, I said, you got the 3 meals, you got activities, you got people of your own age to hang out with.
I do believe you are alone in that, but who knows?
Okay, but I would say, but as you think of the changes, though, with assisted living is running into that same problem. Now, aren't they going to be in a financial challenge place too if they're not changing?
I think absolutely, and I think they already are. Especially with the acceleration of COVID, the way that it's accelerated a lot. It certainly accelerated some of the deficiencies that exist. But the idea behind assisted living was that in its genesis was 100% privately paid,
Right?
and so it was outside of the government programs, if you will, and it really wasn't controlled in its development either. Like nursing homes, there are limits and big regulatory hoops to jump through in order to even build a nursing home. It's very difficult for a provider to come into a market and just build a new nursing home without going through a whole host of things. In a assisted living environment, you can. And so much of the development in assisted livings came from outside of healthcare even. So you had multifamily developers, real estate investors. A lot of that is what drove that initial capital into the market. And so it got to a point where in many markets it's overcapacitated, overbedded, and their occupancy, wasn't meeting the break-even points, and so they've turned to the government as a solution and have begun accepting certain types of government forms of payment for their services. And so now, obviously, the biggest infusion into the market has been because of COVID. They received a lot of relief funding. Okay. And what they've done, knowingly or unknowingly, has introduced themselves into the octopus. Right now, the government will regulate them just as much as they regulate nursing homes.
Right.
And
one thing
that's restraining.
One thing I was going to ask you, over the years, it seems like, I guess you call it the acuity, how much care people need. That there was a time that people, when I first started, the people in the nursing home are really more in assisted living now. The people.
No, back in the day, people went to nursing homes to die, right? It's where the elderly went to live, unfortunately, and it became a stereotypical type of place. Even to this day, many companies will call their skilled nursing facilities transitional care and post-acute care, but it's still very hard for the community and the public to view those of anything other than a nursing home. And so, Jason, you started at that nursing home and then progressed, but you also took some measures as an owner and as in your positions to make a difference with some of that. what do you think people should be doing today, or providers should be doing?
Well, that's a big question, and I think that it's hard to capture everything.
Yeah.
In that one group, but there are just a lot of challenges that the industry is facing, and how they're going to be able to meet the needs of the population that they're caring for today. And I was sharing with Gary, the great example is I've got the buffet. I'm charging $14.99, and that price applies to everybody that walks in the door, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm somehow gambling or calculating that at some point in time, some people are going to eat more, some people are going to eat less, and it's going to average out, and I'm going to be able to pay for the food, right? Mm-hmm. And then I find out that I'm not breaking even, right? And so what are my choices? Well, the instinct would be, well, I'm going to raise the price. Well, what if, and in this case, the government says we don't have any more money.
Yeah.
Right. We cannot pay you anymore. And when I look at the federal government's budget, I get it.
Sure.
They can't. Social Security already, is the number one line item in the budget. Right behind that is the Medicare program, and that was before COVID. I'm telling you that once we see the numbers after COVID,
it's huge.
It will probably equal what Social Security is, nearly 25%.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
And so we're at a point where it's not fundable. This can't just be solved with spending more money. And so the reaction at the buffet would be, well, I got to buy cheaper meat, right? Because the meat is the number one. Well, in our environment, labor is the number one cost.
Yeah. What is it? Is it like 60%, 70%?
Oh, by the time you get benefits, you're up close to 70%.
Wow.
And we're in a market right now where at any price you can't find people.
Yeah.
Right? And so your options become just survival, right? And anytime you're doing something for survival, you're not meeting the customer's demands.
Yeah.
And so you're only disenfranchising the long-term resource that exists, which is your customer. And so because of that, there have to be some pretty significant changes. And I think certainly providers need to be at the table, but I put a lot of responsibility on the regulatory governmental side, because this is a system that they funded, they created, and they've controlled. And they either have the responsibility to recreate it in an acceptable way, or get out of the way and let the market take care of it the right way.
Sure.
Now, when we think, and I'll go over to Pam here, when you think about why people even end up into assisted living or nursing homes, I always think of ADLs, activities of daily living, right? And what are those? And
so what you're talking about are just basic care needs that an individual at some point in life may need. So, for instance, if you're at a point in life, or you've suffered a stroke or a debilitating condition, you may have to have help with eating, bathing,
meals,
toileting.
right.
Yes.
On and off the commode,
yes.
in and out of the shower.
It's a debilitating condition.
Okay. And so over the years, that's been supplemented by friends, family, spouses, caregivers, that whole group there. And, what comes to mind, though, is technology. The one positive thing of COVID was, everything comes to our house now.
Right.
And I was going to ask Jason here, when we think about the future of care, people don't need everything, right? They usually are lacking a couple of those. But what do you see as in the future that technology can bring to us in our own home that may even replace senior care, may replace nursing homes?
Well, conceptually, I think that the answer to this, it lies dramatically with technology. I think we are in a very, very unique time with the exponential growth of technology, and that can be the only solution, if you will, and not the model that we've been operating under, which is a very labor-driven, intense resource solution. And any given point, I don't care if it's in an assisted living or a nursing home, we kind of approach it with the idea that every patient, every customer that's there gets a very similar service, right? We do uniform tasks across the population,
sure,
right? And we might modify a little nuance here or there, a preference here or there, but the functionality of the system is meant to be very even across the idea of meeting a certain type of patient's needs. But when you look at that individual, let's just say there's 50 patients there, there's 100 patients there, there's probably only 10 of them at one point in time where that uniform service is actually spot on. The majority are either on the left or the right, which are they're underutilizing it, meaning they don't need what's being done for them, or they're overutilizing it.
Sure.
Right? Meaning that they actually are demanding more than this typical approach.
Yeah, it's almost like, I hate to equate prisons, but it's almost like doing rounds in prisons, right? There was like a 2-hour kind of walking around and making sure everybody was okay.
Interesting you bring up prisons, because Jason at one time was a prison guard.
No, he was a prison guard.
I was in prison.
Not in prison, but a prison guard.
Oh, good. I'm glad that.
Not the best times of your life, though, right?
Yes and no.
Oh, okay.
So I just I've been very diverse in my experiences.
Yes.
And I found that those things stack on one another in a productive way. And so I can look back at things like that. You know, that was the first job I took out of the military.
Yeah.
For a year, and it had some really good effects on me. Like, number one, I learned a lot of things, but number two, it got me into college, which was the genesis of my career into to where I am today. And so I wouldn't change that. But it was definitely a unique experience.
Yeah, and so, but it's changing though. That's what we're getting at. Is if somebody needs to be turned in their bed, it would seem like there should be technology now.
To turn them.
Or to know that they need. I keep thinking about smartwatches and things like that should end up being in the way we take care of ourselves. Somebody said I talked to somebody, I interviewed him several years ago, and they said I think they're working for like General Electric or something, that you could touch a handle and it could take your vital signs.
Well, sure, that does exist
those
today.
Types of things.
That does exist, and you have technology bracelets that can take your vital signs. Yeah, that all exists, but, and Jason can talk to this, they're very costly.
Well, those things are, but the cost of technology is at such a rapid deflationary pace.
Okay.
That I think that's what is so overwhelming. I would argue that we have to think about it outside of the confines of the box, though, that we're stuck in, which is this idea that we're going to bring technology into a nursing home or into an assisted living the way it exists today. And I'm saying that's a failed strategy. And I know I'm being controversial in saying that, but I think that we are in a period of time where we are rapidly approaching a similarity to where I think automobile dealerships are going to be in 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
So why is that? Because I always think of car dealerships. You go down there, you see the brand new cars, and you're looking around the lot, and then they try to sell you on the service, though. As if that. I always say, I hope I don't ever have to bring my car back here.
Well, the actual cost of ownership, right, is one of the biggest components of owning a vehicle. We don't always look at it that way. We see the price tag, but when you break that price out over 5 years, 6 years, and then you add into the cost of ownership, whether it's the tires, the brakes, the oil, the timing chain, all the things in a combustible engine. That almost equals the annual cost of the actual price tag.
I had no idea.
And dealerships make the majority of their profit from their service department. So with the advent of electric vehicles, which I think are coming in.
The autonomous vehicle.
Well, even just the electric vehicle, before we even get into the autonomous driving part of it, they're here, and they're coming in a tsunami. And they require 2/3 less maintenance. You're taking a very complex combustion engine with many parts, and you're moving it down to a very simplistic electric motor that doesn't require any maintenance. And, oh, by the way, they actually brake themselves, so you don't even go through near the brakes that you do on a combustion vehicle. So my point being, if you think that simply selling electric vehicles on the GM lot that has historically serviced gas combustion engines and sold GM products is going to work, I'm going to say it's probably not, right? And so I think that the creativity needs to be viewed from this perspective, going back to your comments about, even ADLs. So number one, we can monitor people much more effectively. We're not talking about putting a person at the end stage of life in a house alone, right? That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about people age gradually.
Sure.
And we often get to a place where we have to act more aggressively, or we end up acting late. Most of the times people don't arrive at a conclusion where they relocate into a care setting at the perfect time. In the majority of time, and you're forced to because of the situations of life, right? Mm-hmm. Because mom can't fix 3 meals a day. She can't take her medicine. Whatever. She's got a little bit of forgetfulness, and we're worried that she's gonna, lock herself out of the house.
Right.
All these different kind of issues, and we can't cover down on that because we're at work. Yeah. But through technology, the ability to monitor that situation mm-hmm. and respond, right, is going to be there. And I think that opens up a lot of possibilities to living in place longer.
Sure.
It'll allow for transitions to happen more gradually. So maybe it'll be from taking a patient or a client from their own individual house, keeping them there longer, maybe allowing them to then transition into more of a family setting, mm-hmm. right, and sustain that placement longer. Maybe that's a room, maybe it's a adjacent, apartment, whatever.
Sure.
And then you also have the alternative of setting up new style communities that I would call independent oriented communities that are set up with the idea that the patient is going to reside there and age in place through a very prolonged array of services that are going to be able to be provided at that single location without them having to move to another building.
Sure.
The way CCRCs are set up today, where you got 3 phases and you go from one to the next to the next. I don't think that's going to necessarily be what's going to be required. And if you look at the average population today and think about how many people are using Grubhub.
Right.
Right. You think about how many things are getting delivered through Amazon today, mm-hmm. right? Basics. These are silly things. And imagine the idea that that a bed, a specialty bed, mm-hmm. can be logistically managed in a person's home, delivered very efficiently, mm-hmm. that doesn't require them to be turned 2 hours.
Right.
Because so there's and then you have the monitoring, you have
cameras and alerts,
and so we in a nursing home, it's not like you have a staff person looking at a patient 24 hours a day.
Right.
They're in bed. Somebody comes in and checks on them every couple of hours, whatever. Well, the same structure exists with a firehouse. We don't have a fire department located next door to you. We have them in proximity, right? So that they can reach you
that's a
in
good
a
point.
reasonable amount of time.
Sure.
Well, the same structure can be set up to allow for that. Yeah. So I'm excited about that.
I would say, and it's probably one of the positive things with COVID was 2 years ago, if you talked about telemedicine.
You're right.
It was like, oh, yeah, that's science fiction. That's coming. Maybe if you live in the middle of nowhere, that might make sense.
And it wasn't even acceptable in skilled nursing.
Right. And I think it's probably very common now.
It is.
In lots of different areas. I mean, even though seeing your doctor through your computer is becoming more
convenient.
More
through your phone.
Through your phone. And
yes.
So these things are kind of changing us dramatically in a positive way. And I think that's where kind of I wanted to go a little bit with this. As you go into the future, you're probably seeing more where things are coming to the person than the person's going out to get these services, right? You're saying?
Absolutely. So I was thinking about and preparing for this, just something to kind of throw out there that a lot of people may not have heard about, but it's something called augmented reality.
Okay.
So we've all seen over the last, 4, 5, 6 years, virtual reality, right? Mm-hmm. Where you put this big helmet on and.
Oh, yeah. Like video games.
Yeah.
Fly around or go to the Grand Canyon or something. Yeah.
Well, this idea kind of came out. There's a pretty successful company that now has a product that was really developed for the military. And one of the challenges that special ops had was really entering into, urban warfare situations where they had to go into buildings and there's IEDs and there's all sorts of unknowns. So they're using robots, right, to go in.
Sure.
Well, that robot carries a camera, let's say. Well, you don't want to have to put this big helmet to see what's going on. So they've developed basically like an Oakley-style sunglass. That in the upper right-hand corner, there's a frame that shows you the video, right? Every person on the team can see that video. And then that image also gets transmitted back to different locations. So, for example, the application here is I could be doing a new procedure on a patient in Hudson, Ohio today for the first time. I'm a cardiac surgeon, and that glasses that I'm wearing are accurately capturing the procedure. It's also streaming that back to somebody at UCLA who's done this 500 times. Wow. On his monitor, he's taking a pen and he's drawing on the image exactly the right vein to put the clamp on. I see that as I'm standing over the patient in my vision, in my glasses, and we're communicating at the same time.
It's instantaneous. You don't
instantaneous.
You're not waiting for that buffer thing to.
And with 5G being rolled out now, and the connectivity that happens, the speed at which everything is happening, the opportunities are as endless as the ideas, I think, right now.
That's something. That is exciting, and like I said, that's here now, right? To a certain degree.
Absolutely.
So it's not like we're
we're not waiting.
Hope that happens someday.
Right.
A lot of these things are happening now. We're trying to catch up with that technology, like you were saying. That it's like, how much of the computer do we usually use? Like 5% of the computer,
Right.
And
if you're the average person, probably so.
Yeah, it's out there.
So, Jason, I have a question. If a family member of a loved one that needs rehabilitation or added care, what advice would you give them in looking for a nursing home, looking for an assisted living or a memory care? What should they be looking for?
And your question is based on an immediate need, correct?
Yes.
Somebody that is at that point in time, they're at a decision point in time.
Yes.
Well, I think that the same elements that apply to a lot of different human interactions can apply in this scenario too. So number one, is there a genuine comfort with the people that you're interacting with? Mm-hmm. I don't think this is something that can be done remotely, right? Okay. It requires you, I don't know that I would feel comfortable in a intimate connection with somebody that I hadn't met, right?
Yeah, so the virtual visits they were doing during COVID was difficult.
I think it makes it very, very difficult. But I would say that visiting locations, not just the fact that the amenities meet what you want, but the people running the actual operations have credibility, right? And have the ability to build credibility. Mm-hmm. And yes, you can make other choices, but the first choice is the most consequential because it becomes harder to make the move later. Yeah. And so spend the due diligence up front, picking the right facility, and don't go against your gut, right? Don't just try to excuse away things that you don't like.
Sure.
Because they're visible signs that are telling you something. And if it doesn't fit, then find somebody else.
It doesn't feel right.
Right. Then find somewhere else that you have a degree of comfort. Nothing's going to be perfect, but do you feel like that person, just like taking your child to daycare for the first time, right? Yeah. Are these people somebody that I can trust?
You're so right on that.
Yeah. Trust is always the bottom line in all of that. Well, we're going to throw a question at you, Jason. We're throwing this at each of our guests now, and that is, what is your adventure in aging? That's the name of our podcast. And, is there something as you're growing up or something as you're looking forward that's kind of jumps out as a significant moment in your life or a significant point of view that you could share with our audience? What is your adventure in aging?
You're taking my breath away, Gary, with that question. I don't know about adventure. I love life, as silly as that kind of sounds, because things are just getting more interesting for me as my life progresses. I'm finding better ways to meet my curiosities and be able to fulfill my interests, and so that makes a more fulfilling life for me. I think that all the credit for everything that has developed around my life has to go back to my family, right? And probably everybody feels that way. And I'm not saying that even because they were all perfect. I'm just saying that they gave me a foundation to be in a place where I can look back on most of the experiences of my life and gain a perspective of feeling fortunate about it. And to me, that's the best, that's the best gift I could have had, I guess.
I love that.
I can't top that. That's wonderful.
Well, we have had such an educational half hour with you. Thank you so much for being here with us, Jason. And Gary, I think we've come to a conclusion.
It's a wrap. And again, thank you to our sponsor, Stride Light.
Yes.
And appreciate all their support and all the great feedback we've gotten from our audience. And we could go on with Jason for much longer.
No, we really could. And unfortunately, most all of us will face a point in life where we will be looking at senior care, senior health, senior living for ourselves or our loved ones. And you're right. There are many, many other topics that we could touch on into this regard. But we've reached the end. Want to give a big thank you to all of our listeners, asking you to subscribe, review, share. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.